Hey everyone, I'm your author June. Before we get started, I really would appreciate it if everyone could hit the subscribe button. It helps me grow the channel, and I would love for all of you to come on this journey with me, as a family. Now, let's get into the story. Let me know if you enjoy. The sun hammered Cole Ward's spine, each ray a fiery brand. Miniature cyclones of dust spiraled across the desolate expanse, a taunting reminder of his dwindling moisture. Near 2 days since water crossed his lips, and his canteen offered the weight of a dream. Only the saddle's leathery groan and the wind's ceaseless sigh broke the silence. He narrowed his eyes, his gaze sweeping the horizon's rim. An unsettling feeling crawled beneath his skin. The air hung thick and still, the quiet too absolute, a silence that shrieked of imminent danger. He pressed Widowmaker, his dependable Appaloosa, into a slightly brisker pace. The horse, usually high-strung, possessed an unnatural tranquility, amplifying Cole's unease. That prickling sensation intensified, settling at the base of his skull. His gaze darted across the jagged rock formations lining the narrow passage, his hand instinctively drifting towards the well-worn grip of his Colt Peacemaker. He'd weathered worse storms, far worse. Yet, this felt different, acutely personal. Then, the canyon exploded. Gunfire tore through the stillness, ricocheting off the stone cliffs. Bullets snapped past Cole's ears, spitting up geysers of dust. Widowmaker screamed, rearing in panic. Cole wrestled for control, his senses honed sharp. He identified them immediately, 4 figures, perched like vultures above, rifles trained on his position. He recognized the ringleader, Jedediah, a grizzled bounty hunter etched with scars and fueled by a grudge as old as the very rock underfoot. "Ward?" Jedediah's voice echoed, dripping with venomous intent. "This ends now." Cole offered no retort. Words were futile currency here. He dug his heels into Widowmaker's flanks, gambling on a breakneck run through the gauntlet. More shots cracked through the air. A jolt of fire ripped across his shoulder as a bullet punched through his flesh. He bit back a groan, locking down the agony, focused solely on escape. Widowmaker faltered, another projectile finding its mark. The Appaloosa collapsed, catapulting Cole onto the unforgiving ground. The impact winded him, jolting pain through his limbs. He scrambled for sanctuary behind a meager boulder, Colt drawn and ready. The bounty hunters descended, their faces like granite masks. He was outnumbered, outgunned, and bleeding, but not yet defeated. "Come on out, Ward," Jedediah bellowed, a false bravado lacing his tone. "Make it easy on everyone." Cole remained mute, his eyes slits, assessing a landscape devoid of opportunity. He was trapped, plain and simple. He squeezed off a round, forcing Jedediah and his men to scramble for cover. It bought him a precious handful of seconds, enough to reload, enough to brace himself. The bounty hunters advanced, peppering his meager cover with lead. Bullets whined off the rocks around him. Cole returned fire, each shot deliberate, lethal. One of Jedediah's men yelped, crumpling to the ground, clutching his leg. A minor victory. They were closing, however. He felt another bullet tear into his side, a deep, vicious strike. He gasped, his vision swimming. Blood bloomed crimson against the parched earth. He emptied his Colt, the hammer clicking on empty chambers. Jedediah's grin widened, a predatory gleam in his eyes. "Looks like the legend's luck finally ran dry," he sneered, savoring the moment. Cole hauled himself to his feet, his body a symphony of protest. He confronted Jedediah, his gaze unwavering, defiant. He would not beg, would not plead. He'd meet death with the same cold detachment he'd shown countless others. Jedediah raised his rifle, aiming for the heart. "Say hello to hell from me, Ward." He pulled the trigger. Cole felt a searing explosion in his chest. He stumbled backward, his legs betraying him. He crashed to the ground, each breath a ragged struggle. The sky spun, a blurry canvas of pale blue. He could hear Jedediah's laughter, fading in and out like a broken radio. "Leave him," Jedediah barked. "He's as good as buzzard bait." The bounty hunters mounted and rode off, leaving Cole bleeding under the merciless sun. Its heat became unbearable. He closed his eyes, awaiting the inevitable. Time warped and blurred. He floated in and out of consciousness, tortured by fleeting visions, the faces of the men he'd sent to their graves, the incessant clamor of gunfire, the coppery tang of blood. A wave of profound regret washed over him, bitter and corrosive. He'd carved out a life of brutality, a descent into darkness. Now he was condemned to die alone, forgotten in this desolate wasteland. He felt a slight disturbance on his face. He opened his eyes, his vision fragmented. A large black silhouette wheeled above, its shadow blanketing his face. A buzzard, patiently waiting. He tried to move, but his body lay unresponsive, leaden. He was paralyzed, trapped in a dying cage. He closed his eyes once more, yielding to the encroaching darkness. Perhaps he deserved this fate. But within the ruins of his soul, a faint ember glowed of fragile hope for atonement, for absolution. A desperate hope that maybe, impossibly, it wasn't too late. He recalled tales of a haven, whispered in cautious voices, a sanctuary, a foolish dream, clinging to a lifeline that likely didn't exist. The buzzard descended, its shadow consuming him. Cole drew a shallow breath and waited. The desert wind howled, a mournful lament for a life squandered. He tasted dust and the acrid tang of regret. The world dissolved into black. The healer's touch the desert sun was a hammer, each sun-baked pebble reflecting a glare that threatened to split the skull. Mercy Ellis, shaded by her hat's brim, nudged her mount forward. Whirlwinds, miniature dervishes of dust, mocked the horizon with phantom pools of water. She'd been tracking a lost calf, gone astray near the creek, yet a disquieting unease had settled over her. The air felt muted, a silence that pressed upon the ears, deeper than the desert's usual hush. Then, beyond a jumble of rocks, she found him. He sprawled inert, a crimson stain spreading across his chest, his features bleached against the arid backdrop. Recognition struck like a blow Cole-ward. His name, synonymous with violence, echoed in every cantina from that spot to the Rio Grande. Now, he was reduced to a broken thing in the dirt. Instinct screamed for retreat, to abandon him to his fate. Ward signified trouble, a walking cataclysm. But something stronger, a wellspring of empathy, took hold. Dismounting, she moved with a swiftness that belied the turmoil raging within. His breathing was shallow, ragged. The wound, a gash high on his torso, bled sluggishly. Mercy tore open his shirt, her touch unexpectedly gentle despite the urgency of the moment. The shot's precision spoke of a practiced hand. Jedediah, most likely. "Damn you, Ward," she muttered, more to fortify herself than to damn him. She rummaged through her saddlebag, fishing out a canteen and bandages. Damping a cloth, she began to cleanse the wound, her touch surprising in its delicacy amidst the grit. A groan escaped him, his lids fluttering open. "Water," he croaked, his voice a parched rasp. Carefully, Mercy coaxed water between his chapped lips. His gaze, unfocused, struggled to meet hers. "Mercy," he murmured, his voice thick with pain and confusion. What are you doing out here?" "Extricating you from a dire situation, it appears," she retorted, her tone devoid of comfort. "Though I'm rethinking my life choices." She worked with practiced skill, attempting to stem the flow of blood. The injury was severe. He required proper medical attention, something this desolate place couldn't offer. "I'm getting you to Havenwood," she declared, her voice resolute. "Can you manage to stay atop your horse?" He attempted to rise, but a wave of agony slammed into him, leaving him breathless. Can't move?" Mercy sighed, resignation etched on her face. This endeavor would be arduous. She managed to hoist him onto her horse, supporting his weight as she led the animal at a snail's pace toward Havenwood. Each step was a drawn-out torment, the sun a relentless tormentor, the quiet broken only by the creak of saddle leather and Ward's labored gasps. Tucked into a valley, a splash of verdant life against the parched land, lay Havenwood. It was a sanctuary of quietude and simple joys, a refuge for those seeking distance from the West's harsh realities. Mercy's small cabin, nestled on the town's periphery, exuded warmth and a comforting blend of herbs and beeswax. Maneuvering Cole inside proved a Herculean task. He was a mere bundle of dead weight, his strength utterly depleted. She eventually got him onto the bed, her muscles screaming in protest. She divested him of his gore-soaked garments, revealing the tableau of scars etched across his body, a testament to a life lived on the razor's edge. For days, Mercy played the part of tireless caretaker. She tended his wound, brewed potent herbal teas, and coaxed broth between his lips. Words were few, her attention fixed on his faltering life force. He swam through fevered dreams filled with specters of violence and remorse. Names, unfamiliar and heavy with sorrow, tumbled from his lips. Slowly, imperceptibly at first, he began to mend. His fever finally broke, his breathing growing deeper and more regular. His appetite surged back, ravenous in its intensity. Though still weak, a flicker of his former self returned to his eyes. One dawn, he awoke with a clarity he hadn't possessed for days. His gaze swept over the room, registering the simple furnishings, the wildflowers adorning the windowsill, the sunlight painting stripes across the floor. Finally, his gaze met Mercy's, who sat by the hearth, darning a tear in her worn dress. "Thank you," he murmured, his voice raspy but firm. Mercy looked up, her expression unreadable. "Don't express your gratitude prematurely. You're far from recovered." "I am aware," he said, his eyes searching hers intently. "But I owe my survival to you." He studied her face, absorbing the delicate lines etched around her eyes, the gentle curve of her mouth, the quiet strength that radiated from her. He witnessed a deep sorrow, a loneliness mirroring his own. "Why?" he asked, his voice barely audible. "Why did you bother saving me?" Mercy paused, her fingers frozen on the fabric. Her gaze dropped to her hands, then lifted to meet his, steady and unwavering. "Because everyone deserves a second chance," she stated simply. "Even you, Cole Ward." He scrutinized her, attempting to penetrate her motives. "Pity? Compassion? Or perhaps something altogether different?" He perceived a spark, faint yet undeniable, a glimmer of hope that ignited something deep within him. He sought his reflection in her eyes, a fractured image of the man he once was. But he also recognized a possibility, a pathway toward redemption. He extended his hand, his fingertips brushing against hers. Her skin, soft and warm, was a startling contrast to the desert's harshness, the coldness of his gun. "Mercy," he whispered, his voice imbued with a newfound tenderness. "What am I supposed to do now?" Mercy met his gaze, her heart aching for the lost man he was and the man he still had the potential to become. "That, Cole Ward," she replied softly, "is entirely up to you." A subtle disquiet rippled through Havenwood, akin to the tremors preceding an earthquake. Eyebrows arched in silent query, conversations dropped to conspiratorial murmurs, each ending with furtive glances cast toward Mercy Ellis's humble dwelling on the town's periphery. The townsfolk, a resilient community forged by years of frontier grit, were not easily intimidated, yet the arrival of an outsider, particularly one bearing the infamous moniker of Cole Ward, disturbed the delicate equilibrium they had so diligently maintained. Mercy felt the shift in the atmosphere. The familiar, welcoming gestures diminished, replaced by hesitant smiles and wary greetings. Even the children, typically drawn to her warmth and the allure of sweet treats, retreated, their gazes a blend of trepidation and morbid fascination. An invisible barrier seemed to have materialized, isolating her from the town she held dear. Inside, Cole stirred from his sickbed. The fever's grip had loosened, leaving him weakened yet clear-headed. Propped against the pillows she had arranged, his gaze was drawn to the window. Sunlight etched the harsh topography of his face, accentuating the deep ravines carved by years of violence and regret. "They know," he said, his voice a parched rasp. It was not posed as a question. Mercy, grinding herbs at the counter, stilled her hand. "They're just apprehensive," she countered, striving for a confidence she didn't possess. He emitted a dry, humorless scoff. "Apprehensive? They're petrified. And with ample reason." He shifted, a wince betraying lingering pain. "My being here endangers everyone, Mercy. You must realize that? I made my choice, Cole." She faced him, her gaze unwavering. "I won't apologize for it." "Obstinate woman," he grumbled, a flicker of something akin to admiration in his tone. The cabin door groaned open, and Old Man Hemlock shuffled in, his face a road map of wrinkles etched by time and worry. He carried a walking stick, using it more as a punctuation mark than a crutch. "Mercy," he began, his voice thick with concern. "We need a word." His gaze remained, quote, fixed on her, pointedly ignoring Cole. "Hemlock," Mercy returned, a hint of fatigue coloring her voice. She anticipated this confrontation. "This a man you're sheltering," Hemlock continued, his voice dropping. "He's nothing but trouble." "Mercy, you've invited a tempest into our peaceful valley." "He was near death, Hemlock," Mercy responded, her voice rising slightly. "I couldn't simply abandon him to perish in the wasteland. The perishing is what he deserves." Hemlock retorted, his eyes flashing with righteous indignation. "He's a murderer, Mercy, a heartless killer. You imagine tending to his wounds will alter that? That you can cleanse that much blood from his soul?" Cole observed the exchange in silence, his expression unreadable. He understood he was the fulcrum of their argument, the unwelcome element disrupting their idyllic existence. A part of him longed to validate Hemlock's fears, to alleviate Mercy of the burden she had embraced. Yet another, newly awakened part clung to the faintest glimmer of redemption. Mercy sighed, raking a hand through her disheveled hair. "I'm aware of his history, Hemlock. I'm not naive. But I also see the potential for change. Everyone is worthy of a chance. At renewal. Renewal? Renewal? Hemlock spat on the floor, the spittle narrowly missing the woven rug. Certain sins are indelible, Mercy. Some stains cannot be erased. He shifted his gaze to Cole, his eyes reflecting a mix of disdain and pity. You comprehend me, gunslinger? You understand the weight of your actions. Cole met his gaze head-on, his own eyes hardening into flinty chips. I comprehend, he responded, his voice laced with danger. Hemlock addressed Mercy once more, his features softening. I'm concerned for you. Girl, you've always possessed a kind soul, far too gentle for this brutal world. Don't allow this man to exploit you. Don't let him dismantle all you've created. I can manage, Hemlock, Mercy asserted, her voice unwavering. And I have faith in the transformative power of compassion, even for someone like Cole. Hemlock shook his head, his expression conveying deep sorrow. You're a fool, Mercy Ellis, a beautiful, compassionate fool. But I fear your benevolence will be your undoing. He turned and shuffled out of the cabin, leaving a palpable tension hanging in the air. Later that day, Deputy Roy Tillman paid a visit. He stood awkwardly on the porch, his hand hovering near the butt of his sidearm. Still wet behind the ears, his boyish innocence seemed jarring against the backdrop of the unforgiving landscape. Miss Ellis, he greeted, tipping his hat. I just wanted to check in, ensure everything's in order. Mercy offered a reassuring smile, attempting to ease his discomfort. Everything's fine, Roy. Just tending to a sick wayfarer. Roy's eyes darted anxiously toward the cabin window, where Cole remained seated in the shadows. A wayfarer, you say? He swallowed hard, his Adam's apple bobbing nervously. Word around town is, there's a stranger, a dangerous one. He's merely resting, Roy, Mercy soothed, her voice calming. He's in no condition to pose any threat. Right, Roy stammered, his tone lacking conviction. He shifted his weight, his gaze fixated on the window. Just exercise caution, Miss Ellis. Some folks are more trouble than they're worth. He touched the brim of his hat once more. I'll be on my way. As Roy turned to depart, Cole emerged onto the porch, his movements measured but deliberate. He stood beside Mercy, his presence radiating a palpable aura of menace. Deputy, Cole spoke, his voice a low rumble. Appreciate your concern, but rest assured, I'm no trouble to anyone. Roy's eyes widened in alarm, and he recoiled, his hand instinctively moving toward his weapon. He stared at Cole, his face paling with fear. Mr. Ward, he stammered. I didn't anticipate seeing you here. Anticipation can be misleading, Deputy, Cole remarked, a ghost of a smile playing on his lips. Best not to place too much faith in rumors. Roy swallowed hard, his eyes darting between Cole and Mercy. He was clearly outmatched, caught between his duty to uphold the law and his dread of the notorious gunslinger standing before him. Just maintain the peace, Mr. Ward, he finally managed, his voice trembling slightly. That's all I ask. He spun around and fled, all but sprinting back toward town. Cole watched him retreat, then turned to Mercy, his expression unreadable. He'll be back, he predicted. They all will. Mercy met his gaze, her eyes reflecting a mixture of apprehension and resolve. Then we'll be prepared, she declared. We'll confront them together. Yet, as she spoke the words, a tremor of doubt coursed through her. She knew that sheltering Cole Ward was a perilous gamble, and she couldn't shake the premonition that she was on the verge of losing everything. Beneath the surface, the fever's retreat had left Cole depleted, yet clear-headed. From her perch in the rocking chair, Mercy observed him. Sunlight, filtering through the window, illuminated swirling dust motes in silent testament to the room's stillness. His sleep was troubled, a furrow etched into his brow as he mumbled fragmented phrases, their edges raw with suffering, the murmurings of a soul besieged. A sudden spasm racked him. His hand instinctively flew to his absent firearm, before relaxing, a sigh escaping his parched lips. Rising soundlessly, Mercy approached. The chamber held a cloying aroma of medicinal herbs and damp fabric. She brushed a stray lock from his forehead, her fingertips grazing the bristly shadow on his jaw. Even unconscious, his body held itself taut, like a tightly wound spring ready to uncoil. What specters haunted his slumber, she wondered. What past torments did he endlessly replay? Later, Cole occupied a spot on the porch, his weight supported by a weathered beam. He watched her patiently as she repaired a rent in a canvas tarp, the needle's steady rhythm a soothing counterpoint to the muted anxiety permeating their interactions. Her gaze met his, finding him fixed on the rifle leaning untouched against the wall for days. His focus lingered on the holster's worn leather, a brief, indecipherable expression flickering in his gaze. "You haven't touched it," she observed quietly. He remained fixed ahead. "No? Does it feel different?" He shifted, muscles tensing beneath the fabric of his shirt. "It feels quieter now." Mercy resumed her task, letting silence bloom. She knew pressure would only drive him inward. Patience was a lesson hard-earned, crucial for her calling, vital for life. "Quiet can be a blessing," she ventured finally. A mirthless exhale was his only reply. "Not in my trade." "Perhaps you've retired from that trade." His head turned, revealing eyes the color of aged iron, locking with hers. "Don't mistake compassion for naivete, Mercy. That's a perilous error." "I mistake nothing, Cole. I see only what exists." He averted his gaze, jaw clenched tight. "You comprehend nothing of what exists within. Then illuminate it for me." The declaration escaped her lips unbidden, an invitation, a gauntlet thrown. He offered no rejoinder, but the air thrummed with unspoken words. The tension was a tangible thing, a high-voltage current arcing between them. That evening, following their meager meal, Mercy tended to the gash in his flank. The bullet had created a jagged wound, and though healing cleanly, it would leave an enduring mark. As she carefully cleansed the area with a moistened cloth, she noticed the constellation of scars that adorned his torso, relics of old knife fights, the faded imprints of burns, testaments to battles survived or tragically lost. "How many scars?" she murmured, her voice barely audible. He understood the question unspoken. "Too numerous to count." Her fingers lingered on a particularly vicious scar bisecting his shoulder, a jagged line left perhaps by a blunted blade. Each one a narrative. Most tales I'd prefer remained untold. Mercy met his gaze, her own brimming with profound, unwavering empathy. "Certain stories demand narration, Cole, especially those that pain us." He recoiled slightly, a flinch almost imperceptible. "What do you seek from me, Mercy? Confession? Atonement?" "Simply honesty," she responded softly. "With yourself, above all." Silence stretched, his eyes probing hers. She saw the internal struggle unfolding, the battle between the man he was and the man he aspired to become. Finally he sighed, the sound a leaden weight of regret. "There was a boy," he began, his voice a rough whisper. 15 years old. I shot him in the back. Mercy remained unmoved, offering no judgment. She merely continued to cleanse the wound, her touch gentle and unwavering. Why? His eyes closed, the memory seared into his mind's eye. He was reaching for a weapon. I acted preemptively. And I've carried the weight of that decision ever since. He opened his eyes, their depths haunted. Every night, his spectral face appears. Every night, the echo of the shot rings anew. Mercy completed the cleansing and began to apply a soothing balm, her fingers feather-light against his skin. You cannot alter the past, Cole, but you retain dominion over your future actions. He looked at her, a glimmer of hope tentatively sparking in his gaze. Do you genuinely believe that? I must, she stated, her tone resolute. Otherwise, what remains? She finished bandaging his side, her movements efficient and well-honed. Her task complete, she gathered her implements and rose, her gaze lingering on him briefly. Rest, she urged. You require it. As she turned to depart, he reached out, capturing her hand in a surprisingly tender grip. Mercy? She looked back, her pulse quickening. Thank you, he whispered, his voice barely audible. She nodded, rendered speechless, and quietly withdrew from the room, leaving him alone with his phantoms. Yet, as she traversed the hushed abode, she sensed a shift had occurred between them. A barrier had crumbled, a fissure had formed in his hardened facade. And she knew, with a certainty that resonated deep within her, that she would be the one to widen that crack into a breach. The looming question was whether she possessed the capacity to heal the wounds buried beneath. And could she accomplish it before the specters of his past ensnared them both? Sunlight, diluted to a weak gold, seeped past the logs of the cabin, striping the floor with pale light. Cole, his fever finally quelled, lay still, drained but aware. Dust motes pirouetted in the sunbeams, tiny silent witnesses to time's relentless flow, a continuity he felt he'd forfeited. Mercy moved with quiet purpose, tending to the fire. The sharp tang of burning wood mingled with the fading scent of her insistently administered herbal teas. A wordless melody drifted from her lips, an unassuming balm to his frayed nerves. His gaze snagged on her weathered fingers, their gentle brush against the kettle handle, a testament to her unassuming strength. A shift sent a lancing pain through his ribs, an unwelcome echo of recent troubles. "Morning," he croaked, voice rusty from disuse. She turned, her blue eyes, typically bright, clouded with worry. "Cole, awake. How are you feeling?" She approached, laying a cool hand against his forehead. He recoiled, a reaction he instantly regretted. "Better," he mumbled, pulling away. Touch felt like a violation, an unwanted exposure. Much better. She didn't push, yet he sensed her understanding. "I'll make broth. You need to recover your strength." Watching her return to the hearth, Cole studied her, the poised set of her shoulders, her fluid movements that defied the rustic setting. He grappled with why she'd risked so much. He was a hazard, a walking curse. "Why?" he asked, the question hanging in the air, thick with unspoken weight. Mercy paused, her back to him. "Why what, Cole? Why help me?" He needed her to grasp his bewilderment. "You know what I am." She pivoted slowly, her gaze unwavering. "I know what you've done. But I also saw a man who needed help. A man in pain." A harsh, mirthless sound escaped him. "Pain? Lady, you haven't a clue. flashes bombarded him, shards of violence and chaos. The nose-searing stench of gunpowder, the dying cries, the vacant stares of his victims. A man toppling, a hand outstretched. A Manny, he squeezed his eyes shut. The memory remained elusive, shrouded in a fog of remorse. Mercy drew closer, her voice soft yet firm. "Tell me what you do know." The words snagged, feeling like slivers in his throat. He hadn't articulated these horrors in years, burying them in his soul's darkest recesses. "There was a shootout," he started, his voice a bare whisper. "Long ago, fragments remain. Heat, noise, the bodies." He shivered despite the cabin's warmth, massaging his temples, striving to piece together the shattered past. Grotesque faces swam before him. A woman's shriek, a child's sob. "And then?" Mercy prompted, gentle. He shook his head, his mind a turbulent storm of confusion and anguish. "It's gone, lost, like a nightmare." He looked to her, a desperate plea in his eyes. "I don't want to recall." "Maybe you must," she countered, compassion threading her tone. "Maybe facing it is the only path to peace." "Peace?" He gave a brittle laugh. "There's no peace for the likes of me, only death." He saw a flicker of hurt in her expression, but she held her ground. "Don't say that, Cole. It's untrue. You can alter, become better." A desperate yearning to believe her surged within him, to embrace the possibility of redemption. But the burden of his history was immense, a weight he feared he could never cast off. "Regret it?" Mercy's question was barely audible. "The things you've done?" The words hung, a silent indictment. He averted his gaze, unable to meet her eyes. "Regret won't resurrect them," he muttered. "But it can dictate what you do next," she pressed. "Give you cause to live another way." He met her gaze, a raw, wild anguish blazing in his eyes. "There was a girl," he blurted, the words tumbling out. "She was caught in the crossfire. E tried to rescue her, but—" His voice faltered. The image of the girl, her innocent face twisted in agony, burned onto his vision. He could still feel the weight of her limp form in his arms, the slick warmth of blood coating his hands. "It wasn't your fault," Mercy whispered, reaching for his hand. He recoiled again, pulling away. "It was always my fault," he spat, his voice dripping with self-hatred. "I held the gun. I chose this existence." He recalled the allure, the potent freedom, the respect, or rather, the dread. He commanded. He'd been young, seething, and desperate to prove himself. He'd believed himself invulnerable, untouchable. "Why?" Mercy insisted, gently persistent. "Why choose that path?" He hesitated, memories flooding him, raw and lacerating. "My father," he managed, barely a whisper. "He was a drunk, a gambler. He owed dangerous men money. When he couldn't deliver, they came for him. I witnessed it all." He closed his eyes, the image branded in his mind. The vicious beating, the blood, the sheer terror. He was powerless to intervene. "I swore then," he continued, his voice trembling, "that I would never feel powerless again. I learned to fight, to shoot, to survive." He opened his eyes, meeting Mercy's gaze. "But I also learned to kill. And once you've crossed that threshold, there's no turning back." Mercy remained silent, but he saw comprehension dawn in her eyes. She understood, perhaps more profoundly than he did. the winding, shadowed path that had brought him here. She recognized the darkness within, the demons he wrestled daily. The cabin door groaned open, a lance of sunlight highlighting the figure in the doorway. Caleb, his face etched with worry. "They're here, Mercy," he announced, his voice low and urgent. "The men you anticipated. They're in town." A glacial dread seized Cole's heart. His past had finally cornered him. The storm he'd been outrunning had arrived. And now, more than just his life was on the line. Scars of yesterday, the fire popped and hissed, painting the cabin walls with wavering light. Propped against the pillows, Cole watched Mercy as she tended a simmering pot, its aroma a blend of unfamiliar herbs and a fragile promise. The fever had retreated, leaving him drained, yet acutely aware of the peril he'd dragged to her secluded haven. He harbored no illusions the men hunting him would be relentless. Mercy faced him, her gaze steady, unwavering. Beneath her delicate features lay a bedrock of resolve. "How do you feel?" she inquired, her voice gentle yet firm. "Better," Cole croaked, his throat still a ravaged landscape. "Conscious enough to know I've endangered you." The pot clanked softly as she set it aside, the sound magnified in the close space. "You were injured. I couldn't simply abandon you." "They'll be back," he warned, each word a leaden weight. "They won't relent until I'm dead, or return to answer for crimes real and imagined." Mercy settled on the bed's edge, her hands clasped tightly. "I know who you are, Cole Ward. Or rather, what they claim you are." He winced, the accusation hanging in the air like a shroud. "And you still aided me. Everyone deserves compassion, a chance to mend, to become more." Her gaze wandered to the hearth, her expression softening with remembrance. "I understand loss perhaps more intimately than most." He waited, sensing a sorrowful history she seldom revealed. "My family," she began, her voice a breath. "The influenza claimed them all a few winters ago. Mother, father, my 2 younger brothers gone in a matter of weeks." The firelight danced in her eyes, reflecting the enduring ache of that memory. Cole remained quiet, the weight of her revelation pressing down on him. He knew loss, yes, but the sheer magnitude of hers was devastating. "I was studying medicine in Boston at the time," she continued, her voice gaining resolve, as if defiance itself could fortify her. "I hurried back the moment I received word, but I arrived too late. The earth above their graves was already frozen solid. A log shifted, sending a spray of sparks swirling upwards. Silence descended, heavy and profound, broken only by the fire's murmur. I felt so impotent," she confessed, her voice cracking with unshed tears. "All that learning, all that training, and I couldn't shield the people I cherished most." Cole observed her, his own pain a dull throb in his chest. He recognized the reflection of his own powerlessness in her gaze, that agonizing realization of being unable to forestall the inevitable. "That's why I sought refuge here," she said, lifting her chin, her eyes locking with his. "To offer what solace I can, to make a small difference in a world teeming with suffering. I couldn't save my family, but perhaps, just perhaps, I can help someone else." "And what about me, Mercy?" Cole asked, his voice raw with emotion. "Can you save me?" She hesitated, her eyes delving into his, searching the hidden recesses of his soul. "I can offer you sanctuary, Cole. I can tend to your wounds, both visible and those that fester within. But salvation is a journey you must undertake yourself." He averted his gaze, shame prickling his skin. He wasn't sure he even desired to be rescued. He'd lived with the darkness for so long, It had become a familiar companion, a grim comfort. "Why?" he rasped, the word barely audible. "Why bother with someone like me? A killer. A man with more sins staining his soul than anyone should bear." Mercy reached out, her hand brushing his arm. Her touch was feather-light, hesitant, yet it sent a tremor through him, a spark he hadn't felt in years. "Because I perceive something more within you, Cole Ward," she said, her voice ringing with certainty. "I see the anguish, the regret, but I also glimpse a trace of something else, something worthy." He scoffed, a harsh sound cutting through the quiet. "There's no good left in me, Mercy. It withered and died a long time ago." "Then, perhaps," she countered, her eyes glistening with unshed tears, "perhaps we can find a way to rekindle it." Silence returned, but now it pulsed with a different energy. It was pregnant with unspoken inquiries, with fragile hope, with the tentative possibility of redemption. Cole studied Mercy, truly saw her, and found not pity, but empathy, not condemnation, but understanding. He recognized the scars of her past mirrored in his own, and the faint, improbable idea that he might not be beyond redemption flickered to life. But he knew that rescuing himself would demand confronting the demons within. A darkness poised to consume him and everyone unfortunate enough to cross his path. And the looming threat outside served as a stark reminder of the price demanded by his past. The storm was brewing, and he knew it was only a matter of time before it unleashed its fury. A new purpose. The fever's tenacious grip on Cole was finally easing, its hold diminishing. He awoke to the aroma of burning wood mixed with a subtle, almost clinical scent, a welcome shift from the biting reek of cordite that usually permeated his senses. Mercy was already astir, dawn's tender light caressing her face as she tended a pot simmering over the fire. He observed her for a time, finding a balm in the serene cadence of her movements that soothed his agitated mind. "Awake, are you?" she remarked, not turning, but sensing his consciousness nonetheless. "Good. I was starting to contemplate force-feeding you broth all day." His voice remained gravelly, but with renewed strength. Wouldn't have objected too vigorously. A light tinkling laugh escaped Mercy, filling the cramped space. "Don't let it go to your head, gunslinger. Chores await." Cole's brow furrowed as he levered himself upright. "Chores? Of what nature?" "Assisting me," she declared simply, pivoting with a steaming bowl. "Sarah May's young'un, Billy, has a wretched cough. I need to attend to him, and then there's old man Hemlock, laid up out on the West Range with a bum leg. An extra pair of hands would be welcome." Cole gaped, incredulous. "You expect me to play healer?" Mercy pressed the bowl into his hands, her gaze unwavering. "I expect you to be of use. Besides," she added, a playful spark in her eyes, "a diversion from the iron sights of your revolver might do you some good." He consumed the broth in silence, the warmth seeping into his bones. It was a life unforeseen, utterly uncharted. Yet, as he watched Mercy gather her remedies, a peculiar allure stirred within him, a curiosity dormant for years. Sarah May's dwelling was cramped and close, the atmosphere heavy with the tang of sickness and anxiety. Billy, a frail, pallid child, emitted a feeble cough in his mother's embrace. Sarah May met Cole's gaze with apprehension, clutching her son protectively. Mercy knelt beside them, her tone reassuring and gentle. "Let's have a look, Sarah May. Cole is here to lend a hand." Cole lingered in the background, feeling clumsy and superfluous. He'd stared down hardened killers without flinching. Yet the sight of the ailing child evoked a profound sense of futility. He followed Mercy's ministrations, her touch confident and delicate as she examined Billy. She prepared a blend of herbs and honey, patiently encouraging the child to ingest it. "Rest and ample fluids are crucial," Mercy advised, turning to Sarah May. "Keep him warm. I'll be back to check on him tomorrow." As they exited the dwelling, Sarah May's voice, a mere breath, checked their steps. "Thank you, both of you." Her eyes connected briefly with Cole's, a fleeting glimmer of what might have been appreciation replacing the trepidation. The conveyance to Old Man Hemlock's farm was an extended, jolting affair, the terrain unfurling into a scenic vista of sunlit meadows and distant peaks. Cole guided the wagon, his grip surprisingly firm on the reins. Mercy identified assorted flora and herbs along the way, expounding on their curative attributes. He listened intently, absorbing the knowledge, taken aback by his own captivation. Hemlock's homestead was remote and time-worn, the aged man himself as rugged and unyielding as the ancient oak that stood guard in his yard. He greeted Mercy with a curt nod, his eyes scrutinizing Cole. "Done it proper, I reckon," Hemlock stated, indicating his throbbing leg. "Fell off the barn roof trying to fix a sprung leak." Mercy probed the leg with practiced finesse. "A significant sprain, but I don't believe it's fractured. We'll need to bind it securely and keep it elevated." Cole discovered himself assisting, procuring bandages and water, stabilizing the old man's leg as Mercy wrapped it. Hemlock grunted, but refrained from complaint. As they tended to him, Cole noticed the weathered hands, the wrinkles deeply etched into Hemlock's visage, a testament to a life marked by relentless labor and endurance. He discerned a reflection of something he had forfeited, a connection to the soil, a sense of belonging. As they departed, Hemlock addressed Cole, his gaze surprisingly direct. "Word is, you're a swift draw, Ward." Cole stiffened, anticipating censure, alarm. "Maybe you could put that speed to some constructive use for once," Hemlock added, a subtle smile gracing his lips. "This town needs protectin', same as any other." The words lingered, a challenge, an invitation. Cole offered no response, but their weight settled heavily within him. They journeyed back toward town as twilight descended, the horizon ablaze with vibrant hues. As they passed the mercantile, a cluster of men congregated on the porch, their conversation fading as they noticed Cole. He prepared for the customary glares, the whispers, the thinly veiled animosity. But a shift was palpable. A young boy, scarcely 10, dashed towards them, his face glowing with animation. "Mr. Ward! Mr. Ward! Did you truly spot a mountain lion up by Hemlock's place?" Cole paused, then conceded with a barely perceptible smile. "Saw its tracks, son. A sizable one." The boy's eyes widened in wonder. "Wow! Can you shoot it?" Before Cole could reply, one of the men from the porch interjected, his tone remarkably amiable. "Leave the man be, Billy. He's had a long day." He directed his attention to Cole. "Thanks for aiding Mercy with Hemlock, Ward. We appreciate it." The other men nodded in accord, their expressions less wary than before. Cole was taken aback. Not quite acceptance, but a nascent beginning. A fissure in the barrier of mistrust that had encircled him since his arrival. Mercy gave his arm a gentle squeeze. "See? You're already making a difference." Back at the cabin, Cole sat on the porch, beholding the stars as they began to speckle the inky canvas of the night. He considered Sarah May's trepidation, Hemlock's fortitude, the boy's guileless enthusiasm, the begrudging respect of the townsfolk. He mused upon Mercy, her steadfast faith in him, her quiet fortitude. He remained a gunslinger, a man shadowed by his past. Yet perhaps, just perhaps, he could transcend that label. Perhaps he could unearth a renewed purpose, a motive to relinquish his firearm, a reason to remain. Perhaps, with Mercy's support, he could ultimately quell the darkness within and uncover a glimmer of light in this remote, unassuming town. The notion, unexpected and unfamiliar, suffused him with a tentative optimism, a delicate seed sown in the desolate terrain of his soul. The shadow returns. The stagecoach wheezed to a standstill before the Havenwood General Store, a dust cloud swirling around it like a burial shroud. Deputy Roy Tillman, perpetually clammy and anxious, rushed forward, eager for the mail pouch's arrival. His damp fingers grappled with the lock slick against the cool iron. Within, among missives from Sears Roebuck and past due notices, lay a thick, unyielding poster. Roy scowled, extracting it. Bold, inky letters blared. Wanted. Below, a charcoal likeness stared back. A face etched into Roy's memory. A face that had haunted his sleep ever since a certain newcomer rode into town. The artist had captured the glacial glint in those eyes, the severe line of the jaw, the subtle scar cleaving his left brow. Cole Ward. A hefty bounty promised reward for his capture, alive or dead, citing a litany of robberies, assaults, and murders across 3 territories. Roy's throat constricted, his Adam's apple bobbing like a boy in a storm. He knew Cole spelled trouble. The whole town felt it, a tangible unease that permeated the air when he was near. But to see it laid bare, so graphically confirmed, it sent a shiver snaking down his spine. He ducked inside the general store, the bell above the door chiming a discordant welcome. Several townsfolk milled about, examining fabric swatches and peach preserves. Roy cleared his throat, his voice betraying his nerves. "Folks, you all need to see this?" He unfurled the poster, pinning it to the rough-hewn counter with shaking fingers. A collective intake of breath swept through the room as Cole Ward's image confronted them. Murmurs ignited, hushed and fearful. "Cole Ward? That's him all right," rasped Mrs. Abernathy, squinting at the poster over her spectacles. "Living right here amongst us." "A murderer," someone hissed from the rear. "We've been sheltering a killer." Fear, primal and rampant, spread like a brush fire through the small assembly. Doubts, previously buried, now surfaced. They had welcomed a serpent into their bosom, offered it warmth by their hearth. News possessed wings in Havenwood, traveling as swiftly as a prairie fire. Before long, a sparse assembly had gathered outside Mercy Ellis's residence. They kept their distance, a silent, vigilant presence. Some brandished pitchforks, others gripped rifles, their knuckles white. Roy Tillman stood at the fore, his gaze riveted on the closed door. He was a deputy, sworn to maintain order, yet consumed by dread. Inside, Mercy tended to Old Man Hemlock's leg, the wound stubbornly resisting her remedies. She had heard the rising crescendo of voices outside, the ominous hum of unease. She glanced at Cole, seated by the window, his back to her, apparently unconcerned. But she noticed the tense set of his shoulders, the clenching of his fists. He knew. He had to. She completed bandaging Hemlock's leg, her movements precise despite her racing thoughts. "Mr. Hemlock, perhaps staying a while longer would be wise. The roads might be unsettled for a spell." The old man grunted, his eyes, shrewd and ancient, darting between Mercy and Cole. "Safe? Ain't been safe in decades, girl." but I appreciate the sentiment." He pushed himself upright, favoring his injured leg. "Don't fret over me. Seen worse things than folks with torches." He hobbled toward the exit, pausing beside Cole. His gaze, unwavering, met the gunslinger's. "You got a reckoning coming, son," he croaked. "Just see you choose the proper path." Then he opened the door and stepped out into the gathering maelstrom. Mercy faced Cole, her heart hammering against her ribs. He remained by the window, motionless. The silence stretched, thick with unspoken truths. Finally, he broke the quiet, his voice a low rasp. "They know, don't they?" Mercy nodded, unable to meet his eyes. She approached him, resting a hand on his arm. "Kohler." He recoiled slightly at her touch, pulling away. Turning to her, his eyes reflected a torment that mirrored her own. "It's true, Mercy," he admitted, his voice a bare breath. "Everything they're saying about me is true." "I don't believe it," she countered, her voice unwavering despite the trembling in her limbs. "I've seen the man you are now. The man you're trying so hard to be." A mirthless chuckle escaped him. "Trying? Seems a bit late for that, doesn't it? The past ain't so easily shed, Mercy. It clings like a second skin." "Then we'll peel it off together," she declared, her voice gaining strength. "We'll show them you're not the man you once were." He shook his head, his eyes bleak with resignation. "You don't grasp the situation. This isn't a wound you can stitch up, Mercy. This is blood. This is death. This is—" He faltered, incapable of vocalizing the abyss that threatened to engulf him. A sharp knock echoed through the cottage, shattering the fragile pretense of peace. Roy Tillman's voice, tight with strain, called out, "Cole Ward, we know you're inside. Come out without a fight. We don't want trouble." Cole's eyes shut, a tic rippling across his jaw. He understood what was unavoidable. He could linger here no longer. He couldn't imperil Mercy. He was a scourge, a contagion, and he had brought it to her doorstep. He faced Mercy, his eyes brimming with a bottomless sorrow. "Farewell, Mercy," he whispered, his voice thick with unshed tears. "Thank you for everything." "No, Cole, please, no," she begged, seizing his hand. "Don't do this. We can confront this together." He gently disentangled his hand from hers. "I can't," he stated simply. "I have to safeguard you." He moved toward the doorway, his hand instinctively reaching for the revolver at his hip. "Cole, please," Mercy cried, her voice cracking with despair. He paused in the doorway, his back to her. "Don't dwell on me, Mercy," he said, his voice barely audible. "I'm accustomed to the shadows." He threw open the door and stepped out into the glare of the sun. The crowd gasped, their expressions a blend of terror and anticipation. Roy Tillman raised his rifle, his hands quivering. Cole stood there, outlined against the dim interior, a specter from yesterday returned to haunt their present. He surveyed the faces before him, witnessing the fear, the animosity, the condemnation. He met Roy Tillman's gaze, his youthful face etched with worry. His eyes lingered on Mercy, framed in the doorway, her eyes filled with tears. Then, with a sudden, economical movement, he drew his weapon. The click of the hammer echoed in the ensuing hush. But he didn't level it at the crowd. Nor did he aim at Roy Tillman. Instead, he raised it skyward, then hurled it to the ground, the metallic thud punctuating the air. He offered Mercy one final look, a fleeting smile gracing his lips. Then he lifted his hands in surrender yielding to the darkness that had at last overtaken him. Standing tall dust devils danced around Cole's worn boots as he stood, hands clasped behind him, awaiting Havenwood's verdict. The sinking sun stretched grotesque caricatures of the townsfolk across the parched earth, their faces tight with a blend of apprehension and moral outrage. He saw the hard gleam of animosity in some eyes, the deep-seated conviction that his past was a brand he could never shed. A familiar sight, mirrored in the countenances of men he'd wronged, then he'd dispatched. Then Mercy shouldered her way through the throng, her slender frame radiating surprising fortitude. Head held high, her gaze burned with a fierce resolution, quieting the restless murmurs. Roy Tillman, the deputy, his face ashen, feebly attempted to deter her, his hand twitching near his sidearm, but Mercy brushed past him like an annoying gnat. She halted before Cole, her eyes locked on his. "Listen, all of you," she declared, her voice clear and resonant, slicing through the charged atmosphere. "I've seen that wanted flyer. I know the accusations, but I also know the man who bolstered Mrs. Abernathy's collapsed roof. The man who tirelessly sought young Timmy when he vanished into the wilderness. The man who risked life and limb to thwart those highwaymen from plundering the stagecoach." A wave of disquiet rippled through the onlookers. Her words, a balm of truth, clashed sharply with the ruthless outlaw depicted on the dog-eared poster. Jedediah Smith, the burly blacksmith, shuffled his feet, avoiding eye contact. Martha Plimpton, normally the town's most voluble gossip, was uncharacteristically silent, her jaw slack. "He saved me!" A gravelly voice wheezed. Old man Hemlock, leaning heavily against the general store, his arm in a sling, pinned Cole with a surprisingly keen stare. "Those varmints would have left me to rot. Ward here, he fought 'em off. Single-handed, had no call to do that. Could have just kept riding." Hemlock coughed, a dry, grating sound. "Folks can change. Sometimes all it takes is the right motivation." Mercy turned to Cole, her eyes on searching his soul. "Tell them, Cole. Speak your truth." He hesitated. Words had always failed him, dull instruments compared to the lethal grace of his Colt. But gazing into Mercy's hopeful depths, he knew silence was no longer an option. "The man I was, the specter on that poster, he's gone," he said, his voice raspy but firm. "I've committed sins I can't erase, but I swear to you, I'm striving for something better. I'm striving to be the man Mercy deserves." He detected the lingering tendrils of doubt in some faces, the ingrained distrust that wouldn't vanish overnight. But he also glimpsed something else, a spark of hope, a hesitant willingness to believe. Mercy's unwavering faith acted as a beacon, illuminating the bleakness that had haunted him for so long. "He shielded me from a bullet," Mercy pressed on, her voice thick with emotion. "He didn't even know me. He simply saw someone in peril and acted. That is the essence of the man." She moved closer, her hand reaching out to gently touch his forearm. Her warmth jolted him, a visceral reminder of the life he now craved. Deputy Tillman, his brow still furrowed with unease, cleared his throat. "All right, folks. Let's not get ahead of ourselves. That posterette remains official. We must consider public safety." He glanced warily at Cole, then at the crowd. Perhaps temporary confinement, in the jail, while we seek confirmation from the authorities." A low murmur of assent circulated. It wasn't a wholehearted endorsement, but it was progress. Cole gave a slow nod. "I'll comply. I understand your anxieties." He met Mercy's gaze, a silent pledge exchanged between them. He would endure this, for her sake, as Tillman escorted him towards the cramped, wooden jailhouse. Cole felt Mercy's fingers intertwine with his. Her touch, a silent reassurance, banished the specter of isolation. Even behind bars, with the weight of his past threatening to crush him, a flicker of optimism ignited. He stood tall, no longer the dreaded gunslinger, but a man cherished and believed in. Inside the cell, the stale air hung heavy with the scent of dust and iron. Tillman fumbled with the keys, his eyes flitting nervously about the confined space. "I have to do this, Ward," he stammered. "You get it." Cole nodded, his attention riveted on Mercy, who stood just beyond the bars. "I understand, Deputy." He watched Tillman secure the cell door, the metallic clang resonating in the stillness. Once Tillman retreated, mungling about patrolling the perimeter, Mercy approached the bars, her expression inscrutable. "Are you okay?" she queried softly. "I'm fine," Cole responded, summoning a wry smile. "More comfortable than I warrant, probably." Mercy reached through the bars, her fingers lacing through his. "Don't say that, Cole. You deserve every good thing." He glanced down at their joined hands. The contrast between his rough, scarred knuckles and her smooth skin, a vivid depiction of their disparate lives. "I don't know about that, Mercy, but I know I want to earn you." "You already have," she whispered, her eyes glistening. "Just be careful, Cole. I don't want to lose you." He squeezed her hand gently. "I'm not going anywhere, Mercy. Not if I have any say in it." As twilight cloaked Havenwood, Cole sat on the edge of the bunk in his cell, the memory of Mercy's face seared into his mind. He knew his past was a predator, stalking him from the shadows, biding its time to pounce. But he also knew he was no longer that man. He had something worth fighting for now, something worth protecting. He had Mercy, and that was enough to hold his head high, even as his darkest nightmares closed in. The hunters arrive, a gritty haze preceded them, a ochre banner unfurling against the cerulean canvas above Havenwood. At its head rode Jedediah Stone, a figure hewn from the bedrock of resentment, fueled by a decade's worth of suppressed fury. His eyes, the shade of a frozen lake, meticulously assessed the settlement, each structure, each face, a potential sanctuary for his quarry. His retinue, 4 individuals forged in the crucible of pursuit and bloodshed, spread out behind, their rifles reflecting the afternoon light with lethal promise. They were predators, and Havenwood was their designated hunting ground. Their arrival didn't escape notice. A sudden stillness descended, the ordinary sounds of the day, the clang of the anvil, the barkeep's hearty guffaw, abruptly suffocated. Apprehensive faces emerged in windows, while those still outside gravitated towards the edges of buildings, seeking solace in the pretense of shadow. Jed dismounted before the general store, the dry rasp of his saddle cleaving the silence. He secured his horse, each motion measured, exuding an aura of controlled menace. A gloved hand rasped against his stubbled jaw as his gaze swept the assembled townsfolk, their dread a tangible presence. "Which one of you will direct me to Cole Ward?" His voice, a low, gravelly rumble, possessed an undeniable weight, an implicit demand. A woman, clutching her child, recoiled into the bakery's doorway, whimpering softly. A young boy, eyes brimming with apprehension, gestured towards the jailhouse. Jed's gaze followed the child's quivering finger, settling on the modest structure at the edge of town. A mirthless flicker crossed his lips, promising only pain. Deputy Roy Tillman, his face ashen and glistening with perspiration, materialized from the jailhouse, his hand hovering near his sidearm. Barely past boyhood, the sight of Stone and his men visibly unnerved him. Yet, He was the law in Havenwood, duty-bound to protect it. "I'm Deputy Tillman," he managed, his voice betraying a slight tremor. "What brings you here?" Jed's eyes narrowed in dismissal. "My business concerns Ward. I understand he's a guest." "He's in custody," Tillman asserted, a thread of resolve entering his tone. "He will face justice here." A dry, humorless chuckle escaped Jed. "Justice? You presume to offer him justice? You possess no inkling of his transgressions." He advanced on Tillman, his imposing form casting a shadow over the young deputy. "I'm here to collect him. Consider it a transfer of venue." Tillman stood firm, though his legs quivered subtly. "I can't permit that. He's within my jurisdiction." "Jurisdiction?" Jed spat into the dust. "Your authority extends only as far as I allow. Now, step aside, son. I seek no conflict with you." The air grew thick with anticipation, suffocating. The townsfolk watched, breaths suspended, awaiting the inevitable eruption. Jed's men stirred, fingers tightening on their rifles, poised to unleash a hailstorm of lead. Tillman swallowed hard, his gaze flicking between Jed and his men. He was outmatched, outgunned. But to surrender Cole Ward would be a profound betrayal of his principles. "I can't," he whispered, his voice firm despite its softness. "I swore an oath." Jed's eyes blazed with fury. "You're a naive fool, boy. This isn't worth dying for." He seized Tillman by the collar, hoisting him effortlessly. "Now, will you cooperate, or must I persuade you?" Before Tillman could reply, a voice, even and unwavering, sliced through the tension. "Release him, Stone." All eyes pivoted towards the jailhouse. Cole Ward stood there, his expression somber, his gaze fixed on Jed. He was unarmed, his hands held slightly away from his body in a gesture of capitulation. "Cole!" Tillman choked out, struggling. "What are you doing?" "It's all right, Deputy," Cole reassured him calmly. "This is between Stone and me." Jed released Tillman, shoving him aside. He turned his attention to Cole, his eyes burning with loathing. "So, you finally emerge from the shadows." "I've anticipated this moment, Ward." "I know," Cole responded, his gaze unwavering. "I'm prepared to face you." "Face me?" Jed scoffed, a rasping, grating sound. "You mistake this for a fair fight? This is vengeance, Ward, recouping for your misdeeds." "I know my actions," Cole said, his voice tinged with sorrow. "I accept the consequences." Jed advanced, his face inches from Cole's. "The price is your demise, Ward, and I intend to savor it." He paused, his eyes gleaming with malice. "But first, you will suffer. You will rue the day you crossed my path." Jed gestured to his men. "Seize him." Cole offered no resistance as they grabbed him, their grips like vises. His eyes sought out a familiar face in the crowd, finding her before the church, pale with dread, her eyes reflecting both fear and resolve. "Mercy." He offered a subtle smile, a silent pledge to protect her, even at his own expense. Jed observed the exchange, his lips twisting into a cruel smirk. He knew Mercy Ellis was Cole Ward's Achilles' heel, the one vulnerability he could exploit. "Take him to the old Miller farm, just outside of town," Jed instructed, mounting his horse. He glanced back at Mercy, his voice laced with poison. "You might consider observing, Miss Ellis. See the kind of man you defend." Spurring his horse, he led his men and their captive from Havenwood, leaving behind a settlement paralyzed by fear and apprehension. A debt-to-pay dust devils danced across the parched earth, mirroring the whirlwind of fear swirling within Mercy. From the shadowed doorway of the church, she watched as Jed Stone's men secured Cole, their movements brutal, efficient. Each shove, each yank of the rope felt like a blow against her own heart. The air crackled with unspoken threats, heavy with the promise of violence. Jed, a figure carved from granite and etched with bitterness, turned his gaze towards the church. His eyes, cold and devoid of warmth, locked onto Mercy. A slow, deliberate smile stretched across his face, a smile that promised nothing good. He started towards her, his boots crunching on the gravel road, each step a hammer blow against the fragile peace Havenwood had found. "Well, well," Jed drawled, stopping a few feet from the church steps, his voice a low rumble that carried clearly in the tense silence. "If it isn't the angel of Havenwood. Mercy, isn't it? Seems our friend Cole has a soft spot for angels." Mercy stood her ground, her hands clasped tightly in front of her. She refused to let him see her fear, though it threatened to overwhelm her. "What do you want, Stone?" Jed chuckled, a dry, humorless sound. "Want? I want what's owed to me, what's been owed for a long, long time. And you, Miss Ellis, you're going to help me collect." He gestured towards Cole, who stood silently amidst his captors, his gaze fixed on Mercy. A silent plea, a warning, flickered in his eyes. "Cole doesn't owe you anything," Mercy retorted, her voice gaining strength, fueled by a surge of defiance. "He's a changed man." Jed's smile vanished. "Changed? A leopard doesn't change its spots, Miss Ellis. And Cole Ward. He's a leopard through and through. A killer." He spat on the ground, the gesture filled with venom. "You think a few kind words and a warm bed can wash away a lifetime of blood? You're a fool." Mercy ignored the insult, focusing on the underlying pain in Jed's voice. "What happened, Stone? What is it that Cole supposedly owes you?" Jed's eyes narrowed, and for a moment, Mercy saw a flicker of vulnerability in their depths, quickly masked by a renewed wave of hatred. "You really don't know, do you? He probably didn't tell you. Figures. A coward to the end." He paused, taking a deep breath as if steeling himself to speak the words. "My brother, my younger brother, Caleb, Cole Ward killed him." The words hung in the air, heavy and suffocating. Mercy felt a chill run down her spine, colder than the mountain wind. She knew Cole had a past, a dark and violent one, but hearing it laid bare like this, connecting him to Jed's palpable grief, was different. "It was years ago," Jed continued, his voice thick with emotion. "Back in '78. Caleb was young, barely more than a boy. Green, maybe, but with a good heart. He got mixed up with the wrong crowd. Ended up in a poker game in Redemption. Cole Ward was there. A dispute arose. Words were exchanged. And then the guns came out." He paused, his gaze drifting to the distant mountains, as if reliving the scene. "Caleb. He wasn't fast enough. Cole Ward shot him down like a dog in the street. Just like that. Snuffed out a life, a future, a family's hope." Mercy's heart ached for the young man she never knew, for the brother lost, for the pain that had festered in Jed's heart for so long. She also looked at Cole, seeing a man who carried the weight of such actions. "They called it self-defense," Jed spat, the bitterness returning full force. "Said Caleb drew first. But I know the truth. Cole Ward was a predator, a professional killer. He made his living with a gun. My brother never stood a chance." He turned back to Mercy, his eyes blazing with fury. "For years, I've hunted him. tracked him across the territories, waited for my chance. And now, finally, he's within my grasp. And you, Miss Ellis, you're going to watch him pay the price." Mercy met his gaze, her fear slowly giving way to a steely resolve. She saw the depth of Jed's hatred, the all-consuming nature of his grief. She knew that reason wouldn't penetrate his wall of pain, that compassion would be met with scorn. "What are you going to do to him?" she asked, her voice barely a whisper. Jed's smile returned, colder and more menacing than before. "I'm going to give him a taste of his own medicine. He took my brother's life. I'm going to take everything he holds dear, starting with you." He gestured to his men. "Take her," he commanded, his voice devoid of emotion. "Take her to the Miller farm. She'll be waiting for him when he arrives." Two of Stone's men moved forward, their faces grim. Mercy didn't resist, but her eyes remained locked on Cole. A silent promise passed between them, a promise of strength, of defiance, of unwavering love in the face of overwhelming darkness. She knew with a certainty that settled deep in her bones that this was far from over. The debt Jed Stone sought to collect would be paid in blood, but not without a fight. And Mercy Ellis, the quiet healer, would be at the heart of it. Showdown at Havenwood dust devils danced across the Baram. Parched earth. A frantic jig reflecting the apprehension gripping Havenwood. Townsfolk clustered along the boardwalks, their pallid faces betraying a mixture of dread and morbid fascination, their hushed murmurs lost in the immensity of the Montana sky. All eyes bored into the jailhouse, a blocky, unforgiving edifice currently containing Cole Ward. When Cole emerged, Jed Stone's hand clamped onto his arm like a vise. Years of simmering resentment and a hunger for retribution had carved deep lines into Jed's face, a stark contrast to the quiet resolve etched on Cole's countenance. The air thrummed with a palpable hostility, a weight pressing down on the small community. With a snarl, Jed propelled Cole forward. "Get out here, Ward. Let them all witness your reckoning." Cole stumbled, regaining his footing. He straightened, his gaze sweeping the crowd, finally anchoring on the church. There, framed in the doorway, stood Mercy, her small figure radiating a blend of fear and unwavering conviction. Their gazes locked, a silent exchange passing between them, a promise of fortitude, of love undimmed by impending doom. "Stone," Cole began, his voice surprisingly level, betraying none of the turmoil within. "Leave her out of this." "This is between you and me." A jagged bark of laughter ripped from Jed's throat, shattering the tense quiet. "Between you and me? Hardly, Ward. This is about Caleb, about the life you pilfered, about the agony you inflicted. And she," his grip on Cole tightened, "is the lure. The pretty little morsel that finally smoked you out of that rat hole." Mercy moved forward, her voice clear and resonant, cutting through the suffocating tension. "Jedediah, this won't resurrect Caleb. It won't soothe your grief. It will only propagate more suffering." Jed swung towards her, eyes burning with zealotry. "You comprehend nothing, woman. You cannot comprehend. He eradicated my brother. He deserves to perish." "And what of you, Jedediah?" Mercy implored, her voice touched with compassion. "What will this transform you into? Another murderer? Is that what Caleb would have wanted?" Cole watched her, his heart aching with a depth of feeling he hadn't known possible. He witnessed the valor in her gaze, the steadfast faith in whatever sliver of goodness remained inside him. He couldn't permit her to be harmed. He simply wouldn't. "She's right, Stone," Cole asserted, his voice firm. "This won't bring him back. It'll only add another body to the burying ground." "Silence, Ward," Jed spat, his hold constricting. "You surrendered your voice the moment you executed my brother." He drew a revolver from its holster, the metallic snick slicing through the strained air. "Now, you'll expiate your transgressions." A collective gasp arose from the townspeople, a sharp intake of breath that lingered in the atmosphere. Fear pulsed through the crowd, contorting their features. Children burrowed into their mothers, their eyes wide with trepidation. "Jedediah, please." Mercy's plea cracked with raw emotion. "Don't do this. There has to be another recourse." Oblivious, Jed zeroed in on Cole. "Any final words, Ward?" Cole's gaze met Mercy's again, his eyes conveying a love that defied articulation. He read her silent entreaty, her frantic hope for a peaceful resolution. He knew what he had to do. "Just release her, Stone," Cole said, his voice calm and unwavering. "Release her, and I'll accompany you. Anywhere. I'll answer for my crimes." Jed hesitated, his gaze darting between Cole and Mercy. The rage battled with a nascent doubt, a whisper of reason. But the bereavement was too overwhelming, the animosity too deeply rooted. "Too late for bargaining, Ward," Jed replied, his tone frigid and immutable. "You should have pondered that prior to squeezing the trigger." He leveled the revolver, its barrel gleaming cruelly in the sunlight. Cole steeled himself, accepting his impending doom. He closed his eyes, an image searing itself into his consciousness. Mercy's face, her eyes brimming with adoration and absolution. But then, a voice shattered the stillness, a voice ringing with authority and conviction. "Jedediah Stone." "Stand down." Sheriff Brody materialized from the crowd, his face a thundercloud, his own revolver brandished. He positioned himself beside Mercy, a bulwark against the impending violence. "This has continued for long enough," Brody declared, his voice resonating with command. "This is my precinct, and I'll not permit it to devolve into a bloodbath. Stone, lower your weapon." Jed's eyes narrowed to slits, his face a grotesque mask of fury. "This is my affair, Sheriff. Stay out of it." "It becomes my affair when it unfolds in my jurisdiction," Brody retorted, his voice unyielding. "Lower your weapon, Stone, or I will be obligated to intervene." The standoff dragged on, the tension escalating with each heartbeat. Jed's face was a study in rage and thwarted purpose, his hand quivering around the revolver. Cole remained immobile, his eyes glued to Mercy, a silent prayer on his lips. Mercy advanced once more, her voice soft yet resolute. "Jedediah, please heed me. This is not the solution. You're a decent man, Jedediah. Don't permit grief to warp you into someone you're not." Her words seemed to chip away at the wall of fury encasing Jed's heart. He faltered, his grip on the revolver relaxing slightly. He looked at Mercy, his eyes reflecting a pain that mirrored her own. Then a tick pulsed in his jaw. The moment of hesitation evaporated. "It's too late," he rasped, his voice thick with anguish. "It's too late for everything." He swung the revolver back toward Cole, his finger pressing against the trigger. But before he could discharge the weapon, Cole reacted. Hues of sharpened instinct and lethal reflexes surged to the fore. He wrenched free of Jed's grasp, deflecting the revolver off course. The shot exploded, reverberating throughout the town, but it sailed wide, dissipating harmlessly into the vastness of the sky. The brawl had commenced. The price of violence the air thrummed, a taut string pulled to breaking. Jed's face, a mask of virulent animosity, remained locked on Cole. From the Paul church steps, Mercy's fingers ached as she clutched the railing, knuckles bone white. The sheriff's intervention had been a futile gesture, a whisper against a hurricane. Jed was consumed. "You asked for this, Ward," Jed ground out, his voice a gravelly threat. He dismissed Mercy's desperate entreaties, his focus unwavering. Sunlight flashed from the revolver's blued steel as he presented it with lethal efficiency. Time seemed suspended, each moment stretched thin. Cole saw the telltale signs, the tightening of Jed's finger, the raw, untamed malice ablaze in his gaze. Words were useless now. Forget justice, this was about a vengeful hunger that could never be satiated by reason. Instinct, honed by years spent dodging death, propelled Cole into motion. He flung himself sideways as the bullet sliced through the air where he'd stood fractions of a second prior. The report boomed, a harsh crack that ripped through Havenwood, shattering its deceptive tranquility. The brawl Sheriff Brody had desperately tried to defuse had erupted into a full-blown gunfight. Cole scrambled behind a toppled wagon, the sharp tang of dust and aged manure filling his senses. He drew his own Colt Peacemaker, its familiar heft a cold reassurance. He wasn't the man he once was, but he wasn't naive. He refused to become a casualty of Jed Stone's stubborn vendetta. Jed remained planted, firing again. The bullet chewed splinters from the wagon inches above Cole's head. He responded, aiming for a disabling shot. He pulled the trigger, the recoil a sharp jolt in his arm. He saw Jed recoil as the bullet creased his gun hand, the revolver cartwheeling into the dirt. Unbowed, Jed drew a backup weapon, a compact pistol from inside his coat. Cole cursed silently. He was trapped, and Mercy was in the crossfire. "Mercy, down!" he roared, his voice roughened with fear. She hesitated, eyes wide with terror, then lunged behind one of the sturdy columns supporting the church porch. Jed, now utterly consumed by hate, advanced, firing erratically. Bullets peppered the wagon, sending fragments scattering. Cole returned fire, holding Jed at bay, knowing it was a temporary solution. He had to reach Mercy, drag her to safety. A window appeared, a fleeting pause in Jed's onslaught. He exploded from behind the wagon, moving with surprising agility. He bobbed and weaved, a shadow in the chaos, angling towards the church. But Jed had anticipated him. He intercepted, firing a shot that strayed wide, but forced Cole to dive for cover behind a water trough. Then it happened. A shriek pierced the air, a raw sound that shredded Cole's insides. Mercy. He glanced up, seeing her cradling her arm, crimson blooming on her white dress. Jed, momentarily staggered by his errant shot, lowered his gun. The bullet had not been intended for her, but fate had intervened nonetheless. Time worked again, but this time with a different feel. The calculation, the self-preservation, the terror all evaporated, replaced by a frigid, all-encompassing fury. A buried darkness he'd labored to suppress now reignited with feverish intensity at the sight of Mercy's blood. Redemption forgotten. Havenwood erased. Everything dissolved except the perpetrator of her pain. He rose from behind the water trough, his features hardening into a menacing plane. The Colt Peacemaker became an extension of his being, an instrument of retribution. He fixed Jed with his gaze, and in that instant, Cole Ward shed his reformed skin. He was now a harbinger of doom. The metamorphosis registered on Jed's face. A flicker of dread replaced his rage, but far too late. Cole moved with blinding speed, closing the gap in seconds. He fired twice. The first round tore through Jed's gun hand, sending the pistol spiraling away. The second burrowed into his chest. Jed stumbled backward, his eyes wide with disbelief, a dark stain blossoming across his shirt. He fixed Cole with a silent, questioning stare, before crumpling to the earth in a defeated heap. The ensuing quiet was profound, pierced only by Mercy's soft whimpers. Cole stood over Jed's collapsed form, chest heaving, gun still smoking. He glanced down at the man he'd just shot, the man he'd almost killed, and a wave of sickness rose within him. What had he done? Had he sacrificed all his hard-won progress? Had he proven himself, irrevocably, a killer? He holstered the peacemaker and turned toward the church, his heart a frantic drum. He had to reach Mercy. He hurried up the steps, scanning desperately. He found her slumped against the column, pale and drawn. He knelt, his hands trembling as he assessed the wound. "Mercy, talk to me," he implored, his voice thick with emotion. "How bad is it?" Her eyes, filled with pain, also reflected something else understanding. "It's just a graze," she breathed, her voice a fragile whisper. But, Cole." "I know," he interrupted. "I lost it." "You did it for me," she said, reaching out to touch his cheek. "You protected me." Her words, both soothing and deeply cutting, wounded him more than any physical injury. He had protected her, but at what ultimate expense? Had he demonstrated his capacity for change, or merely confirmed the town's worst suspicions about him? He searched her gaze for absolution, for clarity. He saw love, trust, but also a flicker of apprehension. He understood the long road ahead to earn her unwavering faith, to prove his worthiness of her love. He gently scooped her into his arms, ignoring her protests. "I'm getting you inside," he said firmly. "You need to rest." As he carried her into the church, he realized this was not the end, but merely the next chapter. The price of violence had been exacted, but the reckoning was far from over. He had to find a way to reconcile his past with his present, to demonstrate to Mercy, and to himself, that he could become the man she believed he could be. The path toward true redemption stretched onward. A choice of peace, the air hung thick with the acrid smell of gunpowder, a bitter tang that clung to Cole's nostrils. Jed lay sprawled in the dirt, his face a mask of rage and pain, the revolver skittering a few feet away, kicked free by Cole's boot. Cole stood over him, the Colt still smoking in his hand, the tremor in his grip barely perceptible. He could end it, right here, right now. Silence Jed Stone forever. The thought clawed at him, a dark whisper promising release. His fingers tightened on the gun, the cold steel a familiar comfort. From the doorway of the church, Mercy watched, her face pale and drawn. The setting sun cast long shadows, painting the scene in stark contrasts of light and darkness. He saw the fear in her eyes, but also something else, a flicker of unwavering faith. It was that faith, that unwavering belief in the good he was trying so desperately to cultivate, that stayed his hand. He lowered the Colt slowly, the movement deliberate, agonizing. The weight of it felt immense, a physical manifestation of the burden he carried. "It's over, Jed," Cole said, his voice hoarse, rough around the edges. "Just walk away," Jed spat, a glob of blood and saliva landing in the dust. "You think it's that easy, Ward? You think you can just waltz in here, play the hero, and everything's forgiven?" His voice was a low snarl, laced with venom. "You took everything from me." Cole's jaw tightened. He knew the words were meant to provoke, to drag him back down into the abyss. But he wouldn't let them. Not anymore. "I'm trying to make amends, Jed. For everything." "Amends?" Jed laughed, a harsh, grating sound. "You can't make amends for death, Ward. You can't bring back what's been lost." He pushed himself up, wincing in pain, his eyes locked on Cole's. "You'll pay for this. I promise you, you'll pay." Cole stood firm, his gaze unwavering. "I don't want any more bloodshed, Jed. Just let it go." Jed's hand moved, a blur of motion too fast to fully register. A glint of steel flashed in the fading light. A knife. He'd been hiding a knife all along, tucked into his boot. Cole reacted instantly, his body moving on instinct. He sidestepped the lunge, narrowly avoiding the blade, the cold steel slicing through the air where he'd been standing moments before. He stumbled back, off balance, the knife whistling past his ear. He hadn't seen it. He'd been too focused on the gun, on the possibility of a fair fight. He'd underestimated Jed's desperation, his willingness to sink to any level. A wave of self-reproach washed over him. He'd been a fool. Jed pressed his advantage, lunging again, the knife a deadly extension of his rage. Cole parried with his forearm, the blade tearing through his sleeve, a searing pain erupting along his skin. He could feel the warm trickle of blood. He was losing ground, forced back towards the church, towards Mercy. He couldn't let Jed get to her. Suddenly, a shot rang out, shattering the tense silence. It wasn't Cole's. Jed staggered, his eyes widening in disbelief, his attack faltering. He looked down, his hand clutching at his chest, where a dark stain was blossoming on his shirt. From the doorway of the church, Mercy stood, a rifle clutched in her hands, smoke curling from the barrel. Her face was pale, her hands trembling, but her eyes were resolute. She had fired the shot. Jed crumpled to the ground, the knife clattering on the hard-packed earth. He lay still, his eyes fixed on Mercy, a mixture of shock and betrayal etched on his face. Cole stared at Mercy, his mind reeling. He hadn't expected her to intervene, to take a life. She, who abhorred violence, had just saved his. He rushed to her, his heart pounding in his chest. "Mercy, are you all right?" He reached for her, his hands hovering, unsure. She lowered the rifle, her gaze fixed on the fallen man. "I had to, Cole," she said, her voice barely a whisper. "He was going to kill you." He took her hands in his grip firm but gentle. Her skin was cold, clammy. "You did what you had to do," he said, his voice low and soothing. "You saved my life." But he knew, in that moment, that everything had changed. The line she had so carefully drawn, the line between peace and violence, had been irrevocably crossed, and he couldn't help but wonder if he was to blame. Had his presence, his past, forced her to compromise her own values? The thought was a cold weight in his stomach. The peace they had both been striving for suddenly felt fragile, distant, perhaps even unattainable. The choice of peace had been made, but at what cost? The biting tang of burnt powder lingered, a harsh testament to Mercy's misstep. Cole, grimacing at the throb in his arm, kept his gaze pinned on Jed. The younger man's frame shuddered, a tempest of rage and despair swirling in his eyes. Rigid as a statue outside the church, Mercy held the rifle like a useless burden, her expression a study in anguish. The air hung thick and soundless, save for the incessant drone of cicadas. "This doesn't have to end this way, Jed," Cole rasped, his voice a gravelly plea. He saw the yawning emptiness reflected in Jed's pupils, a familiar darkness he'd battled himself. "Drop the knife. Just walk away." Jed's response was a gob of spit on the parched earth. "Walk away? After all this? You think I can just wipe it clean?" "I can't rewrite the past, I know that," Cole countered, each syllable a measured offering. "But the future? That's still ours to shape. And I choose this, an end to it. No more spilling blood, no more fueling vengeance." He reached for his gun belt, the leather softened and molded by years of wear. With painstaking deliberation, he unbuckled it. The small metallic chime of the belt hitting the dirt reverberated in the charged air. He nudged it forward with his boot, toward Jed. "Take them. They're yours now, if that's what you need. But I won't use them again. I swear on it." He held Jed's stare, allowing his sincerity to blaze forth. "I'm done, Jed. Truly done." Deputy Roy Tillman, paralyzed by the preceding gunshot, finally broke his silence. "Cole, you're crazy. He's a menace." Cole ignored him, his entire focus laser-locked on Jed. He witnessed the inner conflict twisting the young man's features, the battle between a burning desire for retribution and the unexpected reality of Cole's capitulation. From the general store's porch, Old Man Hemlock shuffled forward, his cane thumping a slow rhythm against the wood. "He saved this old hide, that Cole Ward did, from the Skinner scum. Could have kept walking. Didn't owe me nothin'." A ripple of murmurs spread through the gathered townsfolk, their faces a mix of apprehension and morbid fascination. They knew Cole Ward, the infamous gunslinger. Now, they were witnessing a transformation. Jed's grip faltered, the knife trembling in his hand. The fiery rage in his eyes flickered, replaced by a nascent understanding. He glanced from Cole to the discarded guns, then towards the church where Mercy stood, her face ashen but determined. You really mean it?" Jed whispered, his voice thin and fragile. "I do," Cole affirmed, his voice unwavering as bedrock. "Take the guns, Jed. Go build a life for yourself. Don't let hate devour you the way it almost consumed me." A pregnant silence hung in the air, heavy with regret, with unspoken burdens, and with the ghosts of yesterday. Then, slowly, Jed's shoulders sagged. The fight seemed to leach from him. He let the knife fall, the blade flashing weakly in the waning light. He shoved it away, out of Cole's reach. "Damn you, Ward," Jed muttered, his voice thick with bitterness, yet laced with something approaching relief. "Damn you for stealing my purpose." He turned and vanished into the approaching night. No one stirred. Not a word was spoken. They simply watched him disappear, the sound of his departing footsteps swallowed by the darkness. Cole rose, his arm aching, and turned to Mercy. Tears streamed down her face, but a spark of hope glimmered within her eyes. He walked towards her, each stride measured, each movement a symbol of his newfound conviction. "Mercy," he murmured, his voice gentle. "I quay." She surged forward, wrapping her arms around him, burying her face against his chest. "Don't," she choked out, her voice muffled against his coat. "Just hold me." He held her close, feeling the comforting warmth of her body, the steady cadence of her heartbeat. In that instant, enveloped by the town's silence and the crushing weight of his own history, he recognized he'd finally discovered something worth defending, something worth living for. Gently he lifted her chin, meeting her gaze. "I love you, Mercy Ellis," he confessed, the words rough-hewn and raw. "More than I ever believed possible." A single tear snaked down her cheek, but she smiled through it. "I love you too, Cole Ward." she breathed back, her voice barely audible. "More than words can ever express." He kissed her then, a profound and tender kiss that spoke of absolution, of aspiration, and of a shared future they would forge together. Deputy Tillman cleared his throat awkwardly, disrupting the intimate moment. Cole? About that knife wound?" Cole grinned, a genuine smile that lit up his entire face. "It's just a scratch, Roy. I'll be fine." He addressed the assembled townsfolk, their expressions still shadowed by uncertainty. He realized the long road ahead to earn their trust, but he was willing to put in the work. "Thank you," he said, his voice resonant and firm, "for giving me another chance." Old Man Hemlock shuffled closer, his cane tapping a steady beat. "You earned it, Cole. You earned it fair and square." One by one, the others nodded, their faces softening. They had borne witness to Cole's transformation, his willingness to surrender his weapons, his unwavering love for Mercy. They recognized a man striving for betterment, a man seeking redemption. The following days unfolded with a quiet resolve. Cole assisted Mercy at the clinic, tending to the ill and wounded. He labored alongside the townsfolk, repairing fences and fixing roofs. Through his deeds, he showed his commitment to Havenwood, to establishing a peaceful and meaningful existence. He still felt the burden of his past, the lingering memories of brutality and loss that haunted his dreams. But now, he had Mercy at his side, her love a constant beacon of strength and solace. One evening, as they sat on the church porch, watching the sunset blaze across the horizon in a symphony of fiery hues, Mercy took his hand. "Havenwood is evolving, Cole," she said gently. "And so are you." He squeezed her hand, his heart brimming with gratitude. "We're evolving together, Mercy, and that's all that matters." He surveyed the town, the modest homes nestled amongst the trees, the tendrils of smoke rising from the chimneys, the faces of the people who were gradually beginning to welcome him as one of their own. He understood the path ahead would be fraught with difficulty, with obstacles and setbacks. But he also knew he was no longer alone. He had Mercy, he had Havenwood, and he had the prospect of building a new life, a life imbued with affection, optimism, and renewal. The destiny of Havenwood, and his own, was no longer etched in crimson, but painted in the gentle, comforting tones of a setting sun. A true haven, finally secured.